It was a hot summer afternoon when 11-year-old Jamal walked down the quiet street of his neighborhood. He had always been the curious sort, eyes wide open to the world, constantly searching for new things to explore. But today, as the sun dipped low in the sky, he would come across something that would change not just his life, but the lives of those around him forever. A simple act of kindness, something so small in the grand scheme of things, would spark a series of events that no one could have predicted. Jamal had noticed the old man sitting outside his small weathered house many times before. His name was Mr. Thompson, and he was a regular fixture in the neighborhood, though not always in the best of health. He was an elderly man, his skin a deep brown, his face lined with a kind of wisdom only time could grant. He didn't have much, just a modest home and his trusty wheelchair that helped him move around. The neighborhood kids knew of him, but Jamal was the only one who ever really stopped to talk. Most of the others thought he was too old, too frail, too different to be someone worth their time. But Jamal, he didn't see it that way. To him, Mr. Thompson wasn't just the old man in a wheelchair. He was someone with stories, someone who had seen the world change in ways Jamal could only imagine. That afternoon, Jamal noticed something unusual. Mr. Thompson was sitting on the porch, looking frustrated. His wheelchair, the one that had always carried him around, was broken. One of the wheels had come loose, and no matter how much Mr. Thompson tried, he couldn't fix it. It was one of those moments when you could tell someone was trying to hold it together, but the frustration was evident. The wheel was stuck, the axle bent, and Mr. Thompson, though stubborn, seemed defeated. Jamal had never fixed a wheelchair before, but he knew how to fix things. His dad had taught him how to use tools when he was younger, showing him how to make small repairs around the house. So, without hesitation, Jamal approached the old man. "Hey, Mr. Thompson," he called out, his voice soft but clear. "Do you need some help with that?" Mr. Thompson looked up, his face softening as he met Jamal's eyes. "I don't want to bother you, boy. I think it's beyond repair." But Jamal wasn't about to back down. "I think I can help. Let me take a look." With a slight nod, Mr. Thompson handed him the broken wheelchair. Jamal bent down, inspecting the wheel carefully. He twisted a few bolts, tried to realign the axle, and after a few moments, the wheelchair was looking much better. It wasn't perfect, but it was usable again. Jamal stepped back, wiping his hands on his shirt, a proud smile creeping across his face. "There you go, Mr. Thompson. It's not brand new, but it'll do for now." Mr. Thompson slowly stood up, pushing himself back into the chair, his face lighting up with gratitude. "Well, you're quite the handyman, young man. Thank you." Jamal nodded, feeling a warm sense of pride, but just as he was about to leave, Mr. Thompson's voice stopped him. "Jamal, wait," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "There's something you should know." Jamal turned back, curious. The old man's face had changed, the gratitude replaced by something else, something Jamal couldn't quite place. It was as if Mr. Thompson was hesitating, weighing whether or not to say something. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "I'm not sure how to tell you this," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice quiet. "But that wheelchair you just fixed, it's not just any wheelchair." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mr. Thompson looked at him, his eyes filled with an emotion Jamal couldn't quite understand. "It's a special one, Jamal. A very special one. And what happens next? Well, that's something you're not going to believe." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The air around them seemed to thicken with mystery. What could Mr. Thompson possibly mean? What was so special about the old man's wheelchair? And why did it feel like Jamal had just stepped into something much bigger than a simple repair job? Before Jamal could ask another question, a strange sound echoed through the street. It was faint at first, but growing louder. A low hum, like something distant but powerful. Jamal turned, his pulse quickening. He glanced at Mr. Thompson, who now had a worried look on his face. "Do you hear that?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's expression darkened. "It's beginning." The hum grew louder, vibrating in the air, and then, as if on cue, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. Jamal stumbled back, eyes wide, but Mr. Thompson remained calm, his grip tightening on the arms of the wheelchair. Jamal had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it had something to do with the wheelchair. Something that was far beyond anything he could have imagined. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The air fell still. Jamal turned to look at Mr. Thompson, who was staring ahead, his face pale. "Jamal," he said quietly, "I didn't want you to find out like this, but you've already become part of something much bigger than either of us." Jamal's mind raced. What was going on? What had he just fixed? And why did it feel like the world was about to change in ways he couldn't understand? The silence between them grew heavy. Mr. Thompson looked at him, his eyes filled with something Jamal couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. "You need to go home, Jamal," he said, his voice stern now. "And you need to tell your family to stay away from this house. It's not safe here anymore." Jamal opened his mouth to ask why, but before he could speak, Mr. Thompson raised a hand to stop him. "Trust me, you're going to need to keep your distance for a while. And whatever you do, don't tell anyone about what happened today. Not yet. Not until you understand what's really going on." The words hung in the air, cold and ominous. Jamal didn't know what to think, but one thing was clear: his life, and his family's life, was about to take a turn into the unknown. As Jamal walked away, the weight of Mr. Thompson's words followed him like a shadow. He glanced back one last time, only to see the old man staring after him, his eyes filled with a knowing that Jamal couldn't yet grasp. And as he turned the corner, heading back toward his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him. Something dangerous, something mysterious, and it all started with a simple act of kindness. Jamal didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mr. Thompson's face, the way it had looked after the hum started, the fear in his eyes that Jamal couldn't shake. What did Mr. Thompson mean by "you've become part of something much bigger"? And why had the old man seemed so afraid when the noise started? There had to be something important about the wheelchair, something he hadn't told Jamal. It wasn't just a simple repair, that much was clear. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. His family had always been close, and they trusted each other. But tonight, the words Mr. Thompson had said echoed in his mind. Jamal knew he had to tell someone, but who could he talk to? His mom. She would be worried, especially if he mentioned Mr. Thompson's warning. But even his mom wouldn't know what to make of it. It wasn't just a broken wheelchair. It felt like something more, something dangerous. At breakfast the next morning, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His mom, as always, was bustling around the kitchen, preparing eggs and toast. She hummed a soft tune, her apron covered in flour, as she moved from the stove to the counter. His little sister, Mia, was already at the table, shoveling cereal into her mouth, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Jamal," his mom said, noticing the distant look on his face. "You okay? You're not eating." Jamal forced a smile, though it felt strange on his face. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." His mom didn't seem convinced. "You've been acting off lately. If something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me." "I know," Jamal said, but the words didn't feel real. What was he supposed to say? "I fixed an old man's wheelchair, and now I think something's happening to us because of it." He didn't want to scare his mom, especially when she had enough to worry about with the bills and the house and everything else. His dad, who had been out of work for a few months, was still looking for a steady job. The last thing Jamal needed was to add more stress to her plate. But as they sat down to eat, something strange happened. There was a knock at the door, sharp and insistent, like someone was waiting for an answer. Jamal froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. His mom glanced toward the door, an expression of unease crossing her face. "I'll get it," she said, standing up and wiping her hands on her apron. But as she walked toward the door, Jamal felt his stomach tighten. There was something unsettling about the knock. It didn't feel like the usual neighborly greeting. It felt urgent. Jamal stood up before she could open the door. "I'll answer it." His mom paused, her eyes narrowing with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Jamal, why don't you just stay here and finish your breakfast?" "I'll be fine," he said, already moving toward the door. The feeling of unease was growing stronger with each passing second. When Jamal opened the door, he didn't expect to see anyone he knew. But standing on the other side was a tall man, his face obscured by a hood. He wasn't old like Mr. Thompson, but there was something about him, something that made Jamal's skin crawl. The man didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his posture stiff, like he was waiting for something. Jamal took a step back, instinctively feeling for the door to shut, but the man raised a hand, stopping him. "Is Mr. Thompson here?" the man asked, his voice low and cold. Jamal felt a knot form in his throat. How did this man know about Mr. Thompson? No, he's not around right now," Jamal answered, his voice wavering. The man's eyes narrowed, and he looked past Jamal, scanning the inside of the house. "You're lying," he said flatly. "Where is he?" Jamal took another step back, now more nervous than ever. The man wasn't making any sense. How did he even know about Mr. Thompson's wheelchair? He had to get rid of him, but the man seemed unfazed by Jamal's hesitation. I don't know who you are, but you need to leave," Jamal said, his voice firmer now, trying to sound like he had control of the situation. He wanted to slam the door, but his hands wouldn't move. For a moment, the man didn't respond. Then his eyes shifted to Jamal's left, where his mom stood in the kitchen, watching with growing concern. The man didn't break his stare, and Jamal felt an icy chill run down his spine. "You're connected to him now, aren't you?" the man said, his voice even quieter, almost a whisper. "You fixed the chair, didn't you?" Jamal's heart skipped a beat. How did this man know about the repair? How could he possibly know? Before Jamal could say anything else, the man took a step back. "You'll find out soon enough. He can't hide forever." Then, without another word, the man turned and walked off, disappearing down the street as quickly as he had come. Jamal stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, his heart racing. What was that? Who was that man? And why did he know about the wheelchair? "Jamal, what's going on?" His mom's voice broke through the haze of confusion, pulling him back to reality. Jamal turned around to see her standing in the kitchen, her brow furrowed with concern. He wanted to tell her everything, but the words were stuck in his throat. He didn't know where to start, how to explain the strange man, or the hum, or Mr. Thompson's warning. I don't know," Jamal muttered, shaking his head as if to clear the fog. "But something's wrong, Mom. Something is really wrong." His mom's face softened, but she still looked worried. "Jamal, talk to me. Who was that man? What did he want?" Jamal looked out the window, watching as the man's figure disappeared into the distance. "I don't know, but I think he was looking for Mr. Thompson. And he knew about the wheelchair. He knew I fixed it." The room fell silent, the weight of Jamal's words hanging heavily in the air. Jamal's mom stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand what he meant. "Maybe you should stay away from Mr. Thompson for now," she said, her voice cautious. "This is all sounding too strange." But Jamal knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just walk away. There was something more to this, something bigger than either of them realized. And no matter how scary it seemed, he couldn't ignore it. Something was about to happen, something that had already begun the moment he fixed that old man's wheelchair. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on him, something he couldn't see but could feel creeping closer each day. The mysterious man who had come to the door was only the beginning, and Jamal knew that whatever was going on with Mr. Thompson and his wheelchair was far from over. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a world he couldn't yet understand. It was as if the universe was giving him glimpses of something bigger, something dangerous, and it was up to him to figure it out before it was too late. The next few days passed in a blur. Jamal tried to act normal, trying to push aside the sense of dread that hung over him like a thick cloud. His mom kept asking about Mr. Thompson, but Jamal didn't know how to explain what had happened. He couldn't tell her about the man at the door. She would worry even more, and he wasn't sure what to believe himself. Every time he thought about it, the pieces of the puzzle seemed to move further away from the picture he was trying to make. Jamal spent hours in his room, going over everything he knew about Mr. Thompson. The old man had lived in the neighborhood for as long as Jamal could remember, but he had never mentioned anything strange about his life before. He was just a quiet, friendly man who loved telling stories about his past, stories Jamal had always found fascinating, full of adventure and mystery. But now, Jamal couldn't help but wonder if there had been something hidden in those stories, something Mr. Thompson hadn't shared. One evening after dinner, Jamal decided to visit Mr. Thompson again. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he couldn't stop thinking about the warning the old man had given him. The more Jamal thought about it, the more the words echoed in his head. Asterisk, you've already become part of something much bigger than either of us, asterisk. His heart raced as he walked down the familiar street toward Mr. Thompson's house. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the neighborhood, but even the peacefulness of the scene couldn't shake the unease in Jamal's chest. He felt like he was walking into a trap, like he was being pulled into something that he couldn't control, but he couldn't stop himself. He needed to know more. When Jamal arrived at Mr. Thompson's house, the door was slightly ajar, and the old man was nowhere in sight. It was odd. Usually, Mr. Thompson was sitting on his porch or inside, reading or working on his various little projects. Jamal pushed the door open cautiously, the familiar creak of the hinges echoing in the quiet. "Mr. Thompson," Jamal called softly, stepping inside. The house was unusually still, too still. There was no sound of the old man's shuffle, no faint hum of a television in the background. Jamal's footsteps echoed as he walked deeper into the house. The living room was empty, and the air felt thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. He passed through the hallway, his eyes scanning the rooms, but there was no sign of the old man. The wheelchair was still there, parked in the corner, its wheels gleaming in the low light, almost as if it were waiting. That's when Jamal noticed something strange. The wall near the back of the living room was covered in old photographs and faded documents. Jamal had seen them before, but now something about them seemed different. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the pictures. There were photos of Mr. Thompson when he was younger, much younger, standing beside people Jamal didn't recognize. But it wasn't just the photos that caught his attention. It was the other things, strange symbols, scribbled notes in the margins, lines of text that didn't seem to make any sense. His curiosity grew, and he started sifting through the papers, carefully picking up the photographs and letters. They were old, worn, and the ink had faded with time, but Jamal could still make out some of the words. He saw references to asterisk experiments asterisk, asterisk energy asterisk, and asterisk machines asterisk. One letter even mentioned something about a asterisk wheelchair project asterisk. It was unclear what exactly it referred to, but the mention of a machine sent a chill down his spine. Suddenly, Jamal's hand froze. There, tucked beneath a stack of papers, was a picture of a much younger Mr. Thompson, standing with a group of people in front of a large, imposing building. In the background, barely visible, was a strange contraption that looked like some sort of machine, but it was too distorted to recognize. The look on Mr. Thompson's face was one Jamal had never seen before, an expression of intense concentration, almost as if he were trapped in a world he didn't fully understand. Jamal's heart raced as he traced the lines of the photograph with his fingers. There was something deeply unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He had to know more. But just as he was about to search further, he heard a sound behind him, a faint rustling, like someone was moving in the next room. "Mr. Thompson," Jamal called, his voice shaking slightly. There was no answer, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. He turned toward the hallway, but before he could take a step, The door slammed shut with a force that nearly knocked him off his feet. The room felt colder suddenly, and the air was thick with an almost electric tension. Jamal backed away from the door, his breath coming in shallow gasps. What was happening? Before he could process what was going on, the wheelchair, the very one Jamal had fixed, began to move. Slowly at first, it creaked as if some unseen force was pushing it forward. Then, without warning, it accelerated, spinning in a tight circle as if it were alive. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, his legs frozen in place. He wanted to run, to get out of there, but his feet wouldn't move. The hum, the same sound that had filled the air when he first fixed the wheelchair, began again. It wasn't as loud as before, but it felt more intense now, vibrating through the walls and floors. Jamal's eyes darted toward the photograph of Mr. Thompson and the machine, and for a split second, he saw something that was almost too quick to catch, flash in the background. It was a shape, a shadow that didn't belong. Jamal stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair behind him. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Was this part of some experiment? Was Mr. Thompson involved in something dangerous? And what was the connection to the wheelchair? Suddenly, the door to the hallway swung open, and Jamal spun around, expecting to see Mr. Thompson standing there. But the figure that appeared wasn't the old man. It was someone else, someone unfamiliar, and they weren't alone. The person stepped forward, their face obscured by a dark hood, and behind them, Jamal could see the faint glow of something electric, something unnatural. "Jamal," the figure said in a low voice, "we need to talk. You've crossed a line you can't uncross." Jamal's heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the figure in the doorway. His mouth went dry, and his mind raced, but nothing felt clear. Who was this person? What was happening to Mr. Thompson? And why was the wheelchair still moving on its own, spinning uncontrollably in the corner? The figure in the doorway stepped forward, and Jamal's first instinct was to run, but his body felt paralyzed, his legs frozen to the spot. The person's face was hidden, but the eerie hum filled the room again, louder this time, as if the very air was vibrating. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, and Jamal could swear he saw fleeting shapes moving just out of the corner of his eye. "We don't have much time," the voice in the doorway continued, its tone cold and urgent. It wasn't the voice of someone trying to comfort him. It was the voice of someone who knew more than they were letting on, someone who didn't want him involved. "What you've done by fixing that chair, it set things in motion. And now you're part of it. You don't have a choice." Jamal's mind was reeling. What does that even mean? What choice? What did I get myself into? His gaze flicked to the wheelchair again. The hum was louder now, almost deafening, and Jamal could see the metal frame of the chair tremble as if it were alive. The wheels spun faster, and a strange, electric blue glow began to pulse from within the chair, illuminating the room in an otherworldly light. The figure in the doorway didn't seem to notice the wheelchair at all. Instead, they stepped closer, their voice lowering. "You think you fixed a simple wheelchair, but you didn't. You opened a door that was never meant to be opened." The figure's words were thick with menace, like every syllable carried a weight that Jamal couldn't quite understand. Suddenly, the air in the room grew thick, heavy, like it was being sucked out. The electric hum began to grow more intense, a low vibration beneath the floorboards, rattling the walls. Jamal could feel it in his bones, like something was shifting, like reality itself was bending under the pressure. "You need to listen to me, Jamal," the voice continued, and Jamal could hear the edge of desperation in it now. "We can't stop this. You've already triggered it. You've already made contact. And now it's coming. It's coming for all of us." Jamal could barely keep up with what was happening. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the warning. What was coming? What did the man mean by contact? He wanted to scream, to ask questions, but his throat felt tight, like he couldn't breathe. In the corner, the wheelchair's glow intensified, now casting sharp shadows that danced across the walls. Jamal's eyes locked onto it, unable to look away. The sound, it wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a low, growling sound, deep and mechanical, vibrating through the air like the start of something massive, something unstoppable. "Get out of here, Jamal," the figure said, his voice turning harsh. "There's nothing you can do now, nothing you can fix. You have to run." Before Jamal could react, the figure turned and vanished into the hallway, disappearing into the shadows just as quickly as he had appeared. Jamal stood there, frozen in place, the weight of the man's words pressing down on him. Run. Where could he run to? How could he escape something that seemed so vast, so much bigger than he could comprehend? The wheelchair in the corner continued to spin, the glowing light becoming more erratic, more frenzied. Jamal could hear it now, a faint, whispering noise coming from the chair, like it was speaking to him or warning him. Every inch of his body screamed at him to leave, to get out of the house and never look back, but something inside him refused. He had to understand. He had to know what was going on. Suddenly, the door to the living room slammed shut behind him with a violent force. Jamal spun around, his breath catching in his throat. The door was locked. He couldn't get out. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of whatever was happening. He ran toward the door, banging his fists against it, but it wouldn't budge. His entire body trembled with fear. The light from the wheelchair grew brighter, blindingly so, and Jamal's vision swam. The hum, now so loud it felt like it was shaking his insides, reverberated through the house, rattling the windows, rattling his bones. The walls around him seemed to pulse, like the entire house was alive, breathing, moving. Then a voice, Mr. Thompson's voice, came through, clear and haunting, though he couldn't see the old man anywhere. "Jamal, you need to trust me." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jamal turned in every direction, but he couldn't find its source. It was as if the house itself was speaking to him, as if Mr. Thompson were trapped within the walls. "Listen carefully," the voice continued, each word carrying a weight that seemed to draw Jamal deeper into the fear, deeper into the mystery. "The chair, it's not just a chair. It was never just a chair. It's a part of something, something much bigger. You've opened the door, and now there's no going back." Jamal's pulse quickened. His eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an escape, but the walls were closing in, and the glow from the wheelchair was blinding. His entire body shook with adrenaline, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor, as if some unseen force had him rooted in place. "The machine will come, and when it does," Mr. Thompson's voice whispered, "it won't stop. You've set it in motion, and now it will consume you, like it consumed me." The hum reached a deafening crescendo, and just as Jamal thought he might lose his mind from the pressure, the entire room seemed to crack. The walls split open with a violent burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the house, rattling everything in its path. In that moment, everything stopped. The hum ceased. The light from the wheelchair flickered once, then went dark. The house fell silent. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't know if it was from the fear or the realization that he had just crossed a line that could never be undone. Something had changed, and whatever was coming next, it was closer than ever before. Jamal stood frozen in the thick silence that followed the explosion of light. His body felt heavy, his heart thundering in his chest, and his mind was still trying to make sense of everything. The entire house had felt like it was on the brink of collapse, but now everything was eerily still. The glow from the wheelchair was gone, the hum had ceased, and the walls seemed to have settled back into place. For a moment, Jamal wondered if it had all been a nightmare, some insane figment of his imagination, brought on by the stress, the fear, the uncertainty. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. Whatever had happened, whatever he had triggered, was real. It was too real. He turned back to the wheelchair, the empty space where it had once been. The floor where it had been spinning was now still. The room, once vibrating with an unnatural energy, now felt hollow, as if it were waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. It was as though the whole world was holding its breath, suspended in time. Then suddenly, the lights flickered again. The house groaned as though it were alive, a deep, guttural sound coming from somewhere below him. Jamal's blood ran cold as a low hum began to build once more. This time, it wasn't just coming from the chair. It was coming from the very foundation of the house, from the walls themselves. The floor beneath him seemed to tremble slightly, like a warning. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. A faint whisper broke through the hum, so soft at first that Jamal almost missed it. But it repeated, louder now, clearer. "It's too late. They're already here." Jamal's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't Mr. Thompson's. It wasn't even the strange figure he'd seen before. This voice was deeper, colder, and somehow more terrifying. It carried with it a weight that seemed to make the air press down on him, suffocating him. He turned in every direction, his pulse racing, but he couldn't see anyone. The hum escalated, and the temperature in the room dropped rapidly. His breath formed mist in front of him. It felt like the walls were closing in again, but this time there was a new sense of urgency, of something far more dangerous about to unfold. Jamal stumbled backward, his mind a whirl of confusion and fear. He knew the voice wasn't his imagination. It was real. It was asterisk here asterisk. He needed to leave, to get out of the house before whatever was coming found him, but the door was still locked. The lights flickered again, more violently this time, before the room was plunged into darkness. Panic surged through Jamal's chest as he felt his way toward the door, his hands fumbling in the blackness. His breathing was ragged, and the sound of his own heartbeat was deafening in the silence. And then, just as he was about to reach the door, the whispering voice returned, but this time it was not in his ear. It was inside his head. "You can't run, Jamal," the voice intoned, sending a shiver down his spine. "You're already part of this now. You're part of something much bigger, something you can't escape. The chair, the machine, they'll find you. They'll always find you." A cold sweat broke out across Jamal's skin. His mind reeled as the words sank in. What did it mean? What was he part of? How had fixing that wheelchair connected him to whatever was lurking in the shadows? His eyes frantically searched the room, but it was impossible to see anything. The darkness felt oppressive, closing in from every side. He had never felt so utterly alone, yet as if he was being watched from all angles at once. The feeling crawled under his skin, like invisible eyes fixed on him, studying him. Suddenly, there was a loud asterisk bang asterisk. Jamal spun around, heart in his throat, but saw nothing. He was beginning to doubt his own senses when the noise came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. They were coming. A sharp breath caught in his throat as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The air seemed to vibrate with each step, and the ground trembled beneath him as if something large, something heavy was approaching. He could hear the faint sound of metal scraping against metal, the unmistakable sound of something mechanical in motion. Jamal's mind raced. Was it the machine Mr. Thompson had mentioned? Was it coming to find him? The footsteps were growing more erratic, more frantic, like whatever was coming was losing control, or worse, gaining it. He had no choice. Panic surged through him, propelling him into motion. He turned and ran, not knowing where he was going, just needing to get away. But just as he reached the hallway, the floor beneath him cracked. It wasn't a small crack. It was a deep, jagged line that split the floor wide open. The noise was deafening, and Jamal stumbled backward, nearly falling. His eyes widened in horror as the crack continued to grow, spiderwebbing across the room. And then from the deep, black abyss beneath the floor, something began to rise. It was impossible to see clearly in the dark, but Jamal could make out the shape, a massive form, moving slowly upward, as if dragging itself from the depths. The sound of the metal scraping against stone filled the air, and Jamal's pulse quickened. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The floor groaned under the strain as the thing pushed through, its form finally becoming clear. It was a machine. At least, part of it was. The rest, though, Jamal's stomach churned as he realized it wasn't just a machine. There were limbs, human limbs, but twisted and distorted, as if they had been grafted onto the metal frame, fused together in ways that made no sense. The whole thing was alive in a way that made his skin crawl. The hum from before was now a full, low growl, the sound of metal grinding against metal. Whatever this thing was, it was coming for him. Jamal's breath hitched as the thing lurched forward, its massive form blocking the hallway, trapping him in the room. His back was pressed against the cracked wall, and the air was thick with the scent of oil, rust, and something else, something wrong. He could feel the machine's presence, pressing in on him, as if it was studying him, waiting for something. The machine, the chair. The realization hit him with full force. The machine had been activated, the chair was just the beginning. And now, whatever Mr. Thompson had warned him about, whatever was coming for him, was already here. Jamal's pulse raced, and his mind screamed for him to move, to run, but he was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The machine's cold, soulless eyes seemed to lock onto him, and he knew in that moment that there was no escape. Jamal's heart hammered in his chest as the grotesque machine loomed closer, its metal limbs creaking and grinding with every step. He could hear the low growl intensifying, vibrating through the floor beneath him. His mind raced, his thoughts tumbling in every direction as his instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the machine, was a physical manifestation of everything he had just barely begun to understand. He was trapped. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Jamal could see the machinery's gears grinding against each other, the twisted limbs moving with an eerie, unnatural precision. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive, or at least something more than human. It was a fusion of the mechanical and the organic, a monstrosity that defied every law of nature. Then something inside Jamal shifted. The fear that had once paralyzed him began to dissolve, replaced with a surge of adrenaline. He remembered the way the wheelchair had moved before, the way it had reacted when he touched it. Maybe there was a way to control it, to turn the tide. It's not too late, he thought, his mind racing. With a deep breath, Jamal squared his shoulders and ran toward the machine, his hands trembling but determined. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment his skin made contact, the world seemed to shudder, as if some hidden force had been unleashed. The machine froze. Its limbs stopped moving, the growl fading into a strange, mechanical hum. Jamal stepped back, his breath ragged, as he realized that the thing wasn't attacking anymore. It was waiting. He didn't have time to question it. Jamal knew he had to act fast. He turned and bolted toward the living room, his eyes darting around for any sign of Mr. Thompson. He needed answers. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. You've triggered something. Something bigger, but what was it? And what did it want with him? Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled again, more violently this time. The hum had become a roar, a deafening scream that rattled the walls. Jamal stumbled, almost losing his balance as he ran back toward the hallway, his pulse racing. The machine was following him. But just as he reached the end of the corridor, the unexpected happened. A door, which he had never seen before, creaked open. Jamal hesitated for a fraction of a second before he heard the voice again, the deep, cold voice that had haunted him throughout the ordeal. "You shouldn't have come back, Jamal." The voice wasn't Mr. Thompson's. It was different, but it carried the same ominous weight. The door swung wide, revealing not the old man, but the figure he had encountered earlier, the one who had warned him to run. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face that was neither human nor completely machine. It was a hybrid, a twisted, distorted version of a person that mirrored the monstrosity now chasing him. "You see," the figure continued, his voice almost regretful, The chair wasn't meant to fix anything. It wasn't even meant to help. It was always a trap, a way to bring you in, to make you part of this. Jamal's breath caught in his throat as the truth slowly dawned on him. The wheelchair, the machine, the whispers. It was never about the chair at all. It had all been a setup, a carefully constructed plan to bring him to this very moment, to this place. He wasn't just trapped in a house with a malfunctioning wheelchair. He was in the heart of something much darker, much more dangerous. And it was too late to escape. "You've become part of the cycle," the figure said, his face twisted in a grotesque smile. "Once you fixed the chair, you bound yourself to the machine. You and Mr. Thompson, you're both part of it now. You're part of something much bigger than you could ever understand." Jamal's mind raced. He could hear the machine moving behind him, its growl rising once again. Whatever this was, it was ancient, it was powerful, and it had chosen him. Before he could process what was happening, the figure raised a hand, and the house seemed to shudder violently once again. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with the same unnerving hum. Jamal felt a sudden pull, as if the very essence of the house was trying to suck him in, to consume him. His body was frozen, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The figure spoke once more, his voice a low whisper. "You were never meant to fix anything, Jamal. You were always meant to be the next part of the machine." In that instant, Jamal's mind exploded with clarity. The wheelchair, the machine, the whispers. It wasn't a malfunction, and it wasn't just random. It was a cycle, a pattern that had been repeating for decades, maybe even centuries. People like Jamal, people who thought they could fix things, were nothing more than pawns in a game they couldn't even begin to understand. And now Jamal was the next piece in this twisted puzzle. But just as he felt the pull grow stronger, the unexpected happened. A loud crash interrupted the figure's words. Jamal's head whipped around, his heart leaping in his chest as he saw Mr. Thompson, alive, but not quite the same. The old man was no longer the frail, weak figure he had once been. He was standing, his eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light, his body emanating a strange energy. In his hands was a glowing, jagged,